What if the person you trust the most is the one hiding the darkest truth? Behind a perfect smile, behind a quiet suburban home, something terrifying was unfolding that no one could see. A wife who slowly started to feel trapped in her own marriage, a husband who seemed flawless to the world, and a secret that would turn love into fear. When she finally tried to speak the truth, it was already too late. Because some stories don't look like danger at first, until they become one. And this is one of those stories that proves the most terrifying things in life are not in movies. They happen in real homes, behind closed doors. Morning sunlight slipped gently through the curtains, painting soft golden lines across the quiet living room. The neighborhood was calm, almost too calm, the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to go wrong. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, and somewhere nearby, a kettle whistled. Aisha stood by the kitchen counter, her fingers wrapped around a warm cup of tea. She looked peaceful, at least, that's what anyone watching would think. Her movements were graceful, practiced, like someone who had learned how to appear calm even when something beneath the surface refused to settle. She smiled as she scrolled through her phone, pausing at a picture she had posted just hours ago. It was a perfect image, her and Zion, standing side by side, laughing. The caption read, "Grateful for this beautiful life." Comments flooded in, hearts, compliments, admiration. From the outside, they were everything people envied. Behind her, footsteps approached. Already up? Zion's voice was smooth, controlled, carrying a warmth that felt rehearsed rather than natural. Aisha turned, her lips forming a quick smile. Yeah, couldn't sleep much. He studied her for a moment longer than necessary. You should rest more. You overthink. She nodded softly, lowering her gaze. Maybe. There was a pause, small but heavy. The kind of silence that doesn't belong in a happy home. Zion leaned in, brushing a quick kiss against her forehead before walking past her. To anyone else, it would have looked affectionate. To Aisha, it felt like routine. Later that afternoon, laughter echoed through the house as a friend's voice played on speaker. Aisha responded warmly, her tone light, her words carefully chosen. But the moment the call ended, the smile disappeared almost instantly, like it had never been real. Her hand tightened slightly around her phone. The screen lit up again, Zion's name. She stared at it for a second too long before locking the phone without answering. Evening arrived quietly. Shadows stretched across the walls as the house grew still. Zion sat in the living room, eyes fixed on the television, though it wasn't clear if he was actually watching. Aisha moved around the kitchen, quieter now, her presence almost invisible. "Why didn't you pick up my call earlier?" he asked suddenly, his tone calm, but sharp underneath. She froze for a fraction of a second. "I was busy." "With what?" "Just things." Another silence. He didn't press further, but the air between them shifted, tense, fragile. Night fell. The house darkened, every corner swallowed in silence. Aisha sat alone on the edge of the bed, her phone clutched tightly in her hands. Her breathing was uneven now, her composure slipping in the privacy of the dark. She opened the recorder. For a moment, she said nothing. Only the faint sound of her breath filled the space. Then, in a whisper barely strong enough to exist, she spoke. "If anything happens to me." Her voice trembled. It wasn't an accident. She stopped the recording, staring at the screen as if it held something more than just her words. And somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. The faint creak in the hallway lingered long after Aisha locked her phone, her heart refusing to slow. Morning came too quickly, washing the night's fear away with soft light and routine. Downstairs, Zion was already dressed, adjusting his watch, every movement precise. To the outside world, he was everything a husband should be. At work, colleagues admired his confidence, his calm authority, the effortless charm that seemed to draw people in. Friends described him as dependable, composed, a man who always knew what to say. "Morning," he said as Aisha entered the kitchen. She nodded, forcing a small smile. "You're leaving early?" "Important meeting." He glanced at her briefly. "Try not to stay in your head today." It sounded like concern. It felt like something else. The door closed behind him, and the house fell silent again. By afternoon, Aisha sat alone, replaying moments in her mind, tiny conversations, small reactions, things that didn't feel right but were impossible to explain. Every time she questioned them, she found herself doubting her own memory. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe he's right. But the unease never left. That evening, Zion returned with the same composed energy, placing his keys down with quiet precision. You didn't call me today, he said casually. I didn't want to disturb you. You don't disturb me. A pause. Unless you're hiding something. Her chest tightened. Why would I hide anything? He stepped closer, his voice softer now, almost gentle. That's what I'm asking you. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The question lingered, twisting itself into something heavier than it should have been. I'm not hiding anything, she said finally. He held her gaze, searching, as if measuring the truth behind her words. Then, just as suddenly, his expression relaxed. Good, he said, turning away. Because trust is important. The conversation ended there, but the weight of it stayed. Later that night, tension finally broke. You've been distant, Zion said, his tone no longer soft. I haven't, Aisha replied, her voice shaking despite her effort to stay calm. You barely talk. You avoid me. His eyes narrowed slightly. It's like you're scared of something. I'm not scared. Then act normal. The words hit harder than they should have. She felt something inside her crack, small, but real. I am acting normal, she said quietly. No, he replied, his voice turning cold. You're not. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Aisha looked away, her thoughts spiraling. Was he right? Had she changed? Or was something else happening? Something she couldn't fully understand? That night, sleep didn't come. Instead, she reached for her phone again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She opened a hidden folder, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed record. No words at first, just silence, then a quiet breath. One recording became two. Two became three. Dates, times, moments. Tiny pieces of a reality she was afraid would disappear if she didn't hold on to them. Because deep down, beneath the confusion and doubt, one thought had begun to settle in her mind. Something was wrong. And if she didn't start keeping proof, no one would ever believe her. The recordings multiplied quietly, each one a fragile attempt to hold onto the truth. By the next evening, the house felt heavier, as if every wall had absorbed the tension building inside it. Aisha moved carefully, her voice softer than usual, her eyes avoiding Zion's for reasons she couldn't fully explain, even to herself. Dinner passed in near silence. You're doing it again, Zion said suddenly, placing his fork down with controlled precision. Doing what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. This, distance. His gaze fixed on her. It's not normal. Aisha swallowed, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. I'm just tired. You're always tired now. The air shifted again, sharper this time. Words hovered between them, unspoken but heavy. Then, without warning, his tone hardened. If there's something you want to say it. Her heart pounded. For a second, she almost did. Almost told him everything. The fear, the confusion, the recordings hidden on her phone. But the moment passed. There's nothing, she said. The silence that followed felt final. That night, something changed. No one outside the house knew exactly what happened. No cameras, no witnesses. Only fragments left behind in a place that now felt too quiet. The neighbors would later recall raised voices, sharp and sudden, breaking through the stillness of the night. It wasn't like before, one of them would say. It sounded worse. But by morning, everything was still. Too still. Aisha was gone. Her side of the bed untouched, her belongings left behind as if she had simply vanished into thin air. There were no signs of struggle, no broken objects, no obvious clues. Just absence. Zion made the call just after noon. My wife is missing, he told the operator, his voice steady, controlled. Concern was there, but measured, almost careful. He explained the situation clearly, answering questions without hesitation. When was the last time you saw her? Last night, he replied. She was fine. Police arrived within the hour, their presence disrupting the quiet order of the house. They searched every room, every corner, noting the details that didn't quite fit. Nothing was overturned, nothing stolen. And yet, something felt off. A cup still sat on the kitchen counter, untouched. A light left on upstairs. Small things, easily ignored, but together, they formed a quiet unease. Zion watched as they moved through the space, his expression calm, cooperative. I just want her found, he said. Outside, neighbors gathered, whispering among themselves. Stories began to form about the argument, the tension, the strange silence that followed. Inside, the search continued. A young officer stepped into the bedroom, his eyes scanning slowly. For a moment, nothing stood out. Then something caught his attention, a slight shift beneath the edge of the bed. He crouched down, reaching carefully into the shadow. His fingers closed around something cold. A phone. Aisha's phone. Hidden. Not lost. Not taken. Left behind. And in that moment, the case stopped being a disappearance. The moment Aisha's phone was found, everything shifted. What once looked like a missing person case now carried a darker weight. The house no longer felt quiet, it felt staged. By evening, Detective Hina Malik stepped inside. She moved with calm precision, her eyes taking in everything without rushing. There was nothing loud about her presence, nothing dramatic, but there was a sharpness in the way she observed, as if she could see what others missed. "Walk me through last night," she said, her voice steady as she faced Zion. He nodded, composed as ever. "We had dinner, talked a little, then went to bed. When I woke up, she was gone." Hina tilted her head slightly. Neighbors reported raised voices. "A small argument," he replied smoothly. "Nothing unusual." Her gaze lingered on him for a second too long. "About what?" He paused, brief, almost invisible. "Just normal things." The answer sounded complete. It wasn't. Hours later, Hina sat with the phone placed carefully in front of her. The device that had been hidden, intentionally. That alone told her something wasn't right. "Let's see what you were trying to protect," she murmured. The first recordings were quiet. Almost nothing, just breathing, faint sounds, moments that didn't seem important. But as she continued, the tone shifted. Aisha's voice appeared. Soft, careful, afraid. "I don't think he realizes I can see through it anymore." Hina leaned forward slightly. "Another file. He keeps saying I'm imagining things." "Another. If something happens, please." The recording cut. Hina exhaled slowly, her expression hardening. These weren't random notes. They were evidence. Not of a single moment, but of something ongoing. Something controlled. She turned to the digital team. "Recover everything." Deleted files, messages, everything. By morning, more pieces began to surface. Text messages that had been erased. Conversations that ended abruptly. A pattern of isolation. Aisha reaching out less, replying slower, her world shrinking quietly. Then came the financial records. Small transactions at first, then larger ones. Transfers to an account not in Aisha's name. Hina stared at the screen. "Who is this?" No one answered. Back in the living room, Zion sat exactly as before, calm, patient, composed. But now, every detail about him felt different. Not wrong on the surface, but too controlled underneath. Hina stepped in again. "You said everything was normal," she began. "It was." She placed a file on the table, then explained this. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not panic, not fear. Just a crack, small but real. Upstairs, the quiet house held its secrets tightly. But they weren't hidden anymore. Piece by piece, truth was beginning to form, not as a single story, but as fragments. And every fragment pointed to the same thing. This wasn't a sudden disappearance. This was something that had been building for a long time. And somewhere within those hidden transactions, there was another name waiting to be uncovered. The unidentified account didn't stay a mystery for long. By afternoon, the name surfaced, Sana. It appeared quietly in the financial trail, then again in recovered messages, like a shadow that had been there all along. Detective Hina Malik stared at the screen, her instincts sharpening. This wasn't random. This was personal. "Bring her in," Hina said. Sana arrived the next day. She looked nothing like what Hina expected. Calm, composed, her posture straight, but her fingers betraying her as they twisted together in her lap. There was hesitation in her eyes. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. "I didn't know he was married like that," Sana said quickly, her voice tight. "He told me they were distant. Practically over." Hina didn't interrupt. She let the silence stretch, watching the discomfort grow. "And when did you find out the truth?" Hina asked. Sana hesitated. "Recently." "How recent?" "A few weeks ago." The answer came too fast. Hina leaned forward slightly. "You were receiving money from him." Sana's expression flickered. He helped me. That's all. With what? Things. Personal things. The vagueness lingered, heavy and intentional. Across the table, Hina slid a printed message forward. Then explain this. Sana's eyes dropped to the page. I told you I'd handle it. She's starting to suspect something. The room went quiet. I didn't know what he meant, Sana said quickly, her voice rising just slightly. I thought he was talking about arguments or something. Hina held her gaze. You expect me to believe that? Sana looked away. Back at the station, the recordings told a different story. Hina played one again, listening more carefully this time. There's someone else, Aisha's voice whispered, fragile but certain. I saw the messages. He doesn't know I know yet. Another file followed. I asked him about it. He said I was imagining things again. Hina paused the audio, the weight of the words settling in the room. Aisha had known. Not just suspected, but known. And she had confronted him. The timeline tightened. Discovery. Confrontation. Disappearance. It wasn't coincidence anymore. Later that evening, Hina returned to the house. The same walls, the same silence, but now it felt different. Heavier. Like it was holding on to something that refused to stay buried. Zion stood near the window, his back partially turned as she entered. You didn't mention Sana, Hina said calmly. There was no reason to. She says you told her your marriage was over. Zion turned slightly, his expression unreadable. It was complicated. Hina stepped closer. Your wife thought otherwise. For a brief moment, something passed through his eyes. Not guilt. Not regret. Something colder. Upstairs, the air felt still, suffocating. As if the house itself remembered that night. Hina looked around slowly. Two people. One secret. One confrontation. And somewhere between those moments, something had gone terribly wrong. But the question wasn't just what happened. It was how far it had gone. The question lingered as the pieces finally began to align. Not just what happened, but how it reached that point. Detective Hina Malik stood in the quiet house, closing her eyes for a moment as she reconstructed the timeline. The fragments weren't random anymore. They formed a pattern, a slow build, a breaking point. Days before Aisha disappeared, everything had already begun to collapse. The recordings captured it. I know about her. Aisha's voice trembled in one file. Please just stop lying to me. The next memory came not from evidence, but from what it revealed. Aisha stood in the living room that night, her hands shaking but her voice steady enough to hold. Zion faced her, silent at first, his expression unreadable. What are you talking about? He asked calmly. Sana, Aisha said, the name heavy in her mouth. I saw everything. A pause. Then a faint smile touched his lips, not warm, not kind. Controlled. You're imagining things again. I'm not. Her voice broke slightly, but she didn't step back. I heard the calls. I saw the messages. You think I wouldn't find out? Zion exhaled slowly, shaking his head. You've been under stress. You're not thinking clearly. The words landed exactly where he intended. Doubt crept in, sharp and familiar. But this time, Aisha didn't retreat. No, she said, firmer now. You don't get to do that anymore. You don't get to make me feel crazy. Something shifted. For the first time, the control slipped. Zion's expression hardened, the calm facade cracking just enough to reveal something darker underneath. You should be careful with accusations, he said quietly. Or what? She asked. The question hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. For a moment, neither moved. Then everything unraveled. Voices rose, sharp, overlapping, no longer controlled. Words lost their meaning, replaced by anger, frustration, something raw and irreversible. The distance between them closed, not with understanding, but with tension that had nowhere left to go. You pushed me to this, Zion snapped. I pushed you. Aisha's voice trembled with disbelief. You lied to me. Because you wouldn't understand. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in around them. In the chaos, something changed. A moment. A movement. A line crossed that couldn't be undone. The recordings ended there. No clear answer. No final words. Just silence. Back in the present, Hina opened her eyes slowly. The house stood exactly as it had that night, but now, it felt like it was holding its breath. Control had slipped. Truth had surfaced. And in that moment of collapse, something irreversible had happened. The only thing left now was to force it into the light. Because somewhere behind Zion's calm silence, the truth was waiting to be confessed. The truth was waiting to be confessed, but it wasn't going to come easily. Zion sat across from Detective Hina Malik in a quiet interrogation room, the air thick with stillness. The same calm expression rested on his face, controlled and measured, as if nothing had changed. But now, the silence around him felt different. He wasn't in control anymore. Hina placed a recorder on the table, her movements slow and deliberate. "We're going to go over that night again." "I've already told you everything," Zion replied. "Then it shouldn't be a problem repeating it." A pause. His fingers tapped lightly against the table, small, almost unnoticeable. But it was the first crack. "You argued," Hina continued. "Neighbors heard it. Your wife confronted you about Sanaa." Zion's jaw tightened slightly. "Couples argue. Not like that." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You're building something that isn't there." Hina didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached forward and pressed play. Aisha's voice filled the room. "You don't get to make me feel crazy anymore." The recording cut. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It pressed against him, forcing something deeper to surface. Zion's gaze dropped for a fraction of a second before returning to Hina. She was unstable. Hina's eyes didn't move. Or she was finally seeing the truth. Another pause. This time longer. "She wouldn't stop," Zion said quietly. The words slipped out before he could pull them back. Hina leaned forward slightly. "Wouldn't stop what?" "Accusing me. Questioning everything." His voice sharpened just enough. "Twisting things." "That's not what the recordings show." "They don't show everything," he snapped. The shift was clear now. Controlled anger. Buried resentment. Hina held steady. "Then show me." Zion ran a hand through his hair, his composure slipping piece by piece. "You don't understand what it's like," he said. "Living with someone who keeps pushing, keeps digging. She was your wife. She didn't trust me. And you gave her a reason not to." Silence. Heavy. Final. For a moment, it seemed like he might stop there. Like he might rebuild the walls he had spent so long perfecting. But something had already broken. "It was just a moment," he said finally, his voice lower now. She wouldn't listen. She kept. He stopped. The realization hit too late. Hina didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room held the weight of what he hadn't said. A moment. Loss of control. Enough. Zion leaned back again, his expression settling, but not completely. The calm was still there, but it was thinner now. Fragile. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," he added, almost as an afterthought. No apology. No real regret. Just explanation. Hina studied him quietly. The truth wasn't fully spoken, but it didn't need to be. Because sometimes, what a person avoids saying reveals far more than any confession ever could. And now, there was only one thing left to uncover. What exactly happened after that moment, and where it had left Aisha? Zion's words didn't end the case. They only deepened its weight. The interrogation room fell into silence again, but this time it was different. It wasn't emptiness. It was resolution slowly forming in pieces no one wanted to accept. In the days that followed, the investigation moved forward with final precision. Reports were filed, timelines locked, evidence compiled into a narrative that could finally stand in court. Zion no longer spoke. His calm had fully returned, but it no longer carried control, only distance. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had changed. But inside the case file, everything had. Yet for Detective Hina Malik, closure never felt complete. Because Aisha's voice was still missing from the end of the story. One evening, she sat alone in the station, the lights dim, the case file open in front of her. Her fingers hovered over one final file, unplayed, untouched since the beginning. Aisha's last recording. Hina pressed play. At first, there was only silence. Then a breath. Shaky, uneven, as if the person holding the phone was trying to hold themselves together. "If you're hearing this," Aisha's voice began softly. Then something went wrong. The room seemed to shrink around the sound. "I don't know if I'll be believed," she continued, "but I need to say it anyway." A pause. A small exhale. "I loved him. I really did." Her voice cracked slightly. "But love shouldn't feel like fear." Silence followed for a moment, heavy and trembling. "He keeps telling me I'm imagining things, that I'm the problem," she whispered. "But I'm not." Another pause. Longer this time. "And if I disappear," she added, barely audible now, "please don't stop looking." The recording ended. Hina didn't move for a long time. The truth of the case was already known. The facts were already written. Justice, in its official form, would proceed. But something inside it would never feel resolved. Because Aisha's voice wasn't just evidence. It was the part of the story that no verdict could replace. Days later, as the final report was sealed, Hina looked at the case one last time. Every detail accounted for. Every question answered on paper. And yet, the silence Aisha left behind still lingered. Not as absence, but as a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying stories are not hidden in fiction or imagination. They exist in ordinary homes. Behind perfect smiles. Behind closed doors no one ever thinks to open.